He wasn't a man who lost people. He was a man who stepped away from them. Not because he hated others, but because being close to people made him feel more uneasy. Not because he was misunderstood, but because the moment he tried to be understood, he felt himself slipping away. So he chose a different kind of life. A life where he endured things alone, rather than adjusting himself to belong. And once he made that choice, he never reversed it. On the morning of September 21st, 1860, inside a second-floor living room on Schöne Aussicht Street in Frankfurt, soft autumn sunlight slipped through heavy curtains, illuminating dust that hovered quietly in the air. When physician Wilhelm Gwinne opened the door, he found an elderly man reclining on a sofa as if he were asleep. 72 years old. His face was calm, not peaceful in the way of rest, but in the way of someone who had already finished his conversation with the world. Gwinne took his wrist, searching for a pulse. There was none. When he touched the man's skin, the cold told him everything he needed to know. Breakfast was still on the table. A piece of bread, a cup of coffee long gone cold. He had woken up as he always did, washed with cold water, prepared his meal, sat down on the sofa, and that was the end. On the floor, a poodle whimpered softly, looking up at its owner. When the window was opened, the sound of ship horns echoed from the main river, and the city of Frankfurt began its day as if nothing at all had happened. No one knew that, in one quiet corner of the city, a man had just finished living the life he had consciously chosen. His name was Arthur Schopenhauer, and today, we're going to follow the path of why he chose solitude, and what kind of life that choice ultimately became.
In the summer of 1803, the docks of London lay under a heavy morning fog. Even the creaking of ropes sounded damp, as if soaked through. At the far end of the pier, a ship sat motionless on the water, its dark outline barely visible, as though it had carried darkness itself into the harbor. Standing beside it was a boy of 15, still far too young to be called a man, quietly holding his breath a single step behind his father. His father, Heinrich Schopenhauer, raised his hand and pointed toward the ship. From the darkness below deck came the sound of chains clashing, and beneath them, low, muffled groans. His voice was cold and flat when he spoke. Look. The boy did not ask questions. Perhaps he already knew. This was the grand tour, the rite of passage for sons of wealthy families, meant to cultivate refinement through travel across Europe. Other boys stood before paintings in the Louvre, listened to arias in Vienna, and gazed in awe at the ruins of ancient Rome. They would return home and say, "The world is beautiful." This boy saw something else. He saw chains in the London docks, children digging through trash in the slums of Paris, workers collapsing, coughing blood, in the factory alleys of Geneva. Perhaps his father intended this, or perhaps he simply wanted his son to see the world exactly as he saw it, to inherit not his wealth, but his melancholy. That night, the boy returned to his lodging, lit a candle, and opened his journal. His hand trembled as he held the pen, whether from the cold London air or something deeper, he could not tell. He wrote, "The world is not beautiful. People lie. Behind prosperity, there is suffering." He stopped writing and looked out the window. Somewhere in the dimly lit streets of London, a scream cut through the night. The journey continued, and so did the seeing. In Vienna's grand ballrooms, crystal glasses clinked, and silk dresses brushed past one another. Just outside, in the alley beside the building, A starving child sat with his hand outstretched. No one looked at him. By the shores of Lake Geneva, white swans glided across clear water. But beyond the hills, black smoke rose endlessly from factory chimneys, and coughing echoed from behind stone walls, erasing the beauty of the scene. The boy began to ask questions. Why does no one talk about this? Why does everyone insist the world is beautiful? Why is the truth buried in silence? There were no answers. His father simply walked ahead. The boy followed behind. Between them, there were no words. Perhaps this was when he began to change. The way he saw the world, the way he trusted people, the sense of what he was meant to do. When other boys returned from their travels, speaking excitedly, "You should have seen how magnificent Paris was. London was incredible." This boy said nothing. What he had seen was different. Or perhaps he had seen the same things and simply refused to look away. At dinner one evening, his mother Johanna asked, "How was the trip? Did you enjoy it?" After a long silence, the boy answered quietly, "Not really." She put down her fork and sighed. "Why are you always so gloomy? We gave you such a wonderful opportunity." The boy stared at his plate. He was not gloomy. He was being honest. But the world did not want honesty. People wanted beauty. They wanted hopeful stories. They wanted to be told that everything would turn out fine. Truth was uncomfortable. Pain was something to look away from. And those who noticed the cracks were seen as ruining the mood. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever seen a crack in something everyone else called beautiful? Found yourself unable to smile when everyone else was laughing? Told the truth, only to be told you were too negative, too sensitive? Perhaps you too caught a glimpse of adult hypocrisy at a young age. And from that moment on, the world began to look different. From that day forward, the boy saw the world differently. Or perhaps not differently, perhaps more clearly. He saw the suffering behind wealth, the decay behind beauty, the despair behind laughter. That kind of vision is not a blessing. It is often a curse. Because once you see what was hidden, you cannot unsee it. What the 15-year-old boy witnessed at the London docks in the summer of 1803 was not merely shock. It was a fracture in his worldview, and that fracture widened, slowly but relentlessly, until it defined the rest of his life. He had seen the truth. The question now was whether he would speak it.
On a rainy day in April of 1805, something covered in cloth surfaced in the murky waters of a canal in Hamburg. As the police pulled it toward the shore, the people who had gathered stepped back, covering their mouths. Rain soaked through the fabric, revealing the outline of a body beneath it. When the officer lifted the cloth to confirm the face, he looked up. At that moment, someone came running, breathless, and shouted, "It's Schopenhauer!" When the 17-year-old boy arrived, his father was already covered. Cold rain fell through his hair, ran down the back of his neck, but he did not move. What had happened? The official record called it an accident, a fall into the canal during a nighttime walk. But there were things that did not add up. His father knew how to swim. He had learned in the Baltic Sea as a child, swam every summer, and was never afraid of water. That night, the moon was bright. Witnesses later said the streets were well lit, that stars were visible. The canal was not deep. An adult man could stand in it with the water reaching only his waist. There were ladders along the edges, iron handholds meant for climbing out. People whispered. Their murmurs blended with the sound of rain and drifted into the boy's ears. Maybe. What if? The sentences never finished. Only silence followed. The boy heard everything. He asked nothing. When he returned home, he went straight to his father's study. Everything was exactly as it had been. An open ledger on the desk, a coat draped over the back of a chair, glasses resting by the window, a pen standing in an inkwell. As if his father had only stepped out for a moment. As if he might return. But he would not. The boy opened a drawer and found a sealed envelope. It was addressed to one of his father's business partners. Carefully, he unfolded the letter. The handwriting trembled. I can no longer endure this. The business is doing well, the money is sufficient, and yet The sentence stopped there. The rest of the page was blank. The boy set the letter down and looked out the window. Rain continued to fall. The canal water moved slowly, clouded and dark. The street was empty. He wondered, had his father fallen, or had he jumped? And then he realized there was no difference. Either way, the outcome was the same. Death. On the day of the funeral, people dressed in black passed by the coffin and spoke in practiced phrases. My condolences. He was a good man. May he rest in peace. The boy stood with his head lowered. No one could see his face. There were no tears, no surge of grief. Only numbness. Only emptiness. That night, he returned to his room, lit a candle, and opened his journal. He began to write. Did my father fall, or did he jump? He paused, then wrote again. Does it matter? Either way, the result is the same. Death. He lifted the pen once more. Perhaps my father was right. Perhaps leaving this world was... He slowly erased the sentence. Ink smeared across the page. He wrote again. No. That too is only escape. He erased it again. His hand was shaking. He closed the notebook. A few days later, his mother, Johanna, said, We have to leave now. We're leaving Hamburg. We'll move to Weimar. We'll make a fresh start. The boy looked out the window. What about my father? What happens to him when we leave? He did not ask. You cannot leave someone who is already gone, or perhaps someone who had been gone long before his body followed. And yet, he could not mourn. He felt as though he should be sad, but sadness never came. As though he should cry, but no tears appeared. As though he should feel something, but there was nothing. Perhaps it was not because the pain was too small, but because it was too large. When emotions grow beyond what the mind can bear, the heart freezes to protect itself. The 17-year-old did not cry at the funeral. People noticed. That boy is cold. His father died and he didn't shed a single tear. Does he feel nothing at all? The whispers reached his ears. He heard them. He did not respond. They did not understand. He was not cold. He was frozen. It was not that he felt nothing. It was that he could no longer feel. Perhaps something broke that day. His trust in people, his belief that the world could be endured. Or perhaps emotion itself. He witnessed his father's death, but could not grieve. He stood at the funeral, but could not mourn. He was surrounded by people, yet entirely alone. And that isolation would follow him for the rest of his life. On the night before leaving the house, the boy entered his father's study one last time. Everything was still there. The ledger, the coat, the glasses. but no one would ever use them again. He sat at the desk and leaned back into the chair his father once occupied. He looked out the window. The same view his father had seen every day: the canal, the slow-moving water, the quiet street. He understood. Or perhaps he did not want to understand, but found himself understanding anyway. Why his father stood at this window in silence. Why words slowly disappeared between them. Why, on that night, his father walked toward the canal. When the world becomes unbearable, when wealth offers no warmth, when living itself turns into pain, where does a person go?
In the spring of 1814, a large house in Weimar came alive every Wednesday evening. Candles were lit, laughter filled the rooms, and poets, novelists, and critics gathered in Johanna Schopenhauer's salon, raising glasses of wine and trading clever remarks. Warm candlelight flickered across the walls. The air was thick with perfume and tobacco smoke. Johanna shone at the center of it all, and people burst into laughter at her every word. From time to time, Goethe himself would appear, and the moment he stepped through the doorway, the room seemed to brighten. And yet, in one corner of the living room, near the window, a 26-year-old man sat with a book open in his hands. No one spoke to him. The candlelight touched his face, but the shadows were deeper. Laughter reached his ears, but he was not part of it. He waited. Why did he stay there? He could have left. He could have gone to his room, closed the door, been alone. But he did not. Perhaps he was waiting. Waiting for his mother to notice him. Waiting for her to turn away from the crowd and say, even once, "Arthur, come here. Let me introduce you." That moment never came. As the night wore on, the salon grew louder. Johanna's laughter rang out above everything else. The young man pretended to read, turning the same page again and again, his eyes returning to the same sentence. A guest passing by stopped and glanced at the book. "You're Mrs. Schopenhauer's son, aren't you?" The young man looked up. "Yes." "What are you reading?" The question was polite but distant, already halfway back to another conversation. "Kant," he replied. "Oh, philosophy." The guest nodded. "That sounds interesting." Silence followed. The guest hesitated, then shifted his weight. "Well," he said, and walked away. The young man lowered his gaze. The same sentence was still there. After 11 o'clock, guests began to leave one by one. Johanna stood at the door, smiling, saying, "Until next Wednesday." When the final guest departed and the door closed, the salon suddenly fell quiet. The candles had burned low. Wine glasses sat scattered across the tables. Servants moved softly through the room, cleaning. The young man was still sitting there. Johanna crossed the room and said, her voice tired, "You're still here? Go to your room and rest." He closed his book. "Mother." She stopped. "Yes?" Carefully, he asked, "Did you read my manuscript?" Johanna sighed. Fatigue and irritation were mixed into that breath. "I did." He waited. For praise or criticism, anything at all. "What did you think?" Johanna looked at him. Candlelight cast shadows across her face, making her expression hard to read. "Arthur," she said slowly, "it's too dark." He stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, loud in the quiet room. "Too dark?" She nodded. "Yes, it made me feel gloomy the whole time. Why do you see everything so negatively?" His voice rose slightly. "If the truth is dark, what choice do we have?" Johanna laughed. It was not a warm sound. "The truth?"
You think that's the truth? Yes, he said firmly. I only wrote the world as it is. She shook her head. No, you only see what you want to see. There is beauty in the world. There is hope. And yet you... She stopped, then continued. People want happiness. They want hope. And your writing makes people miserable. Silence fell between them. The candle flames trembled. His jaw tightened. So you want lies? He asked. Her voice sharpened. Not lies, comfort. What's the difference? Is comforting people with sweet lies, teaching them to look away from the truth, is that really comfort? She stepped closer. Arthur, why are you so stubborn? He took a step back. The small distance between them felt enormous. I'm only telling the truth. Her voice shook now. And what good is that truth when no one wants to hear it? No one cares about your dark philosophy. He asked quietly. No one? She did not answer. Not even you, Mother? Silence answered for her. He gave a bitter smile. Something broke in that smile. I understand, he said calmly. I'll go my own way. She reached out. Arthur. You go yours, he said, and turned toward the stairs. She followed, her voice rising. Wait, where are you going? I only said that because I want you to succeed. It's all right, he replied, without stopping. His footsteps echoed on the wooden stairs. From below, she shouted, You'll live alone your whole life if you live like this. He did not turn around. He disappeared into the darkness of the upstairs hallway. That night, he closed his door, took out a bag, and by the light of a single candle, began to pack. His hands trembled, but he did not stop. He folded his clothes, stacked his books, and carefully placed his manuscripts on top. Outside, the Weimar night was silent. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Just before dawn, as the sky began to lighten, he lifted his bag and left the room quietly. Johanna was asleep. The house was still. The servants had not yet risen. He descended the stairs and placed a small note on the dining table. I will no longer trouble you. That was all. When he opened the front door, cold morning air brushed his face. The street was empty. Birds began to sing in the distance. He did not look back. The bag weighed heavily on his shoulder, but he kept walking. His footsteps echoed on the cobblestone road as the sun began to rise. They would not see each other again for 24 years. No letters, no messages, no mention of each other's names. In the spring of 1838, when Johanna died, her son did not attend the funeral. People whispered, "He didn't even go to his mother's funeral. How cold-hearted." The man, now 50 years old, heard them. He did not respond. But that does not mean it did not hurt. Have you ever faced a choice like that? Truth or love? Honesty or preserving a relationship? Speaking your voice or staying silent to belong? Perhaps you too have lost someone because you chose to tell the truth. And perhaps that night you were left alone, asking yourself, was I wrong? Should I have given in? Was this the right choice? As he left Weimar, the young man thought, perhaps his mother was right. Perhaps no one truly wants to hear the truth. Perhaps he was the one who was wrong. But he could not stop.
There was nothing else he could do but speak the truth. To be loved for a lie was worse than being rejected for honesty. Compromise was never an option for him. Was that arrogance or integrity? Perhaps it was both.
On a Monday morning in March of 1820, the corridors of the University of Berlin were packed with students. Footsteps and laughter echoed off the stone walls, and voices burst out from every direction. "Hurry! There won't be any seats left!" They were all heading to room 201. When the doors opened, students poured in like a wave. The seats vanished in seconds. Soon the hallway itself filled with students standing shoulder to shoulder, peering through the windows just to catch a glimpse inside. It was Hegel's lecture. At the same time, across the corridor in room 203, a 32-year-old man opened his book, laid out his manuscript, and checked the wall clock. It was exactly 10 o'clock. He slowly looked around the room. Rows of desks, a clean blackboard, morning sunlight streaming through the windows. Everything was ready. Everything except one thing. There were no students. He waited. The ticking of the clock sounded loud in the quiet room. From across the hall, applause suddenly erupted, the sound slipping through the walls and reaching room 203, faint but unmistakable. 5 minutes passed. The man sat down and unfolded his manuscript again, silently mouthing the first sentence. 10 minutes passed. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. He lifted his head and looked toward the door. No one entered. 15 minutes passed. Why did he choose this time? The philosophy department's schedule placed 2 lectures side by side, both on Monday at 10 in the morning. Hegel, Introduction to Philosophy. Schopenhauer, The Essence of Philosophy. The same hour. It was no accident. The man had chosen it himself. When he submitted his lecture proposal, he requested the exact same time as Hegel. He believed his philosophy would prevail. He believed students would choose truth. Across the hall, sounds continued to spill through the walls. Laughter, applause, exclamations of excitement. History progresses. Hegel's voice rang out with passion. Spirit realizes itself. The students erupted again. The man sat and listened. He turned his gaze to the window. A tree swayed in the wind. A bird flew past. The sky was clear. A student walking down the corridor slowed near room 203 and glanced inside. Their eyes met. The student hesitated. For a brief moment, just 1 second, hope rose. Then the student looked away, quickened his pace, and disappeared into room 201. The man watched him go. When the lecture hour ended, the man quietly gathered his papers. He picked up a piece of chalk, paused, then set it back down. He stepped into the hallway just as the doors of room 201 burst open. Students flooded out, voices buzzing with excitement. Wasn't dialectics amazing? The idea of historical progress, it's so hopeful. I can't wait for next week. The man walked among them. They brushed past his shoulders, absorbed in conversation, never turning their heads. It was as if he were invisible. He descended the stairs, his footsteps echoing softly, while the laughter behind him faded away. The following week he returned. This time 4 students sat in the room. Surprise and relief crossed his face. He straightened his posture and began with renewed energy. On will and representation, does the world exist as we see it, or does our perception create the world? The students were present, but they were not listening. One stared out the window, another doodled in a notebook, a third yawned. Only the 4th nodded occasionally, pen moving slowly. The man pressed on. He raised his voice, drew diagrams on the board. Their eyes remained dull. When the hour ended, the students stood up and left quickly. No questions,
No thank you. 3 weeks later, only 2 students remained. He explained more gently. He tried humor. Their faces stayed blank. 6 weeks later, there was 1. The lectures became almost private tutorials. He asked questions, recommended books. The following week, even that student did not return. After 10 weeks, the room was empty. The man stood alone. The rows of desks seemed to stare back at him. Sunlight revealed dust drifting through the air. The ticking clock marked the seconds. He walked to the blackboard, picked up the chalk, and slowly wrote, "The world is the representation of the will."
White dust clung to his fingers. The words were clear. No one would read them. He lowered the chalk and looked at his hands. The powder settled into the lines of his skin. He brushed his palms together, but it did not fully come off. Again, applause echoed from across the hall. He wanted to cover his ears. He didn't. He stood still and waited for the sound to fade. Back in his office, he opened a drawer and pulled out Hegel's book, The Phenomenology of Spirit. He did not read it, he dissected it. He wrote in the margins, sophistry. Next page, falsehood. Then, charlatan. He pressed the pen harder. Ink bled through the paper. The page tore. He stopped. His heart was racing. Ink stained his fingers. He closed the book, shoved the desk, stood up, and walked to the window. Outside, students laughed as they passed by. Spring had arrived. Flowers bloomed on the trees. The world looked beautiful. To him, it was not. What was the problem? Was the material too difficult? His manner too cold? The timing wrong? Or was it simply that he was not Hegel? Perhaps none of those. People listen to what they want to hear. Hope, progress, meaning, a future. Hegel gave them that. History moves forward. Spirit fulfills itself. Everything gets better. The man offered the opposite: suffering, repetition, meaninglessness, the blindness of the will. The world is essentially suffering. Desire cannot be satisfied. History repeats the same tragedy. The students chose. Of course they chose Hegel. Who wants to hear despair at 10 in the morning? Have you ever experienced something like that? Saying what you believe is right and no one listens? Offering your best work and no one cares? Cheers echo from across the hall while your room stays silent. It wasn't a lack of effort. It wasn't a lack of ability. What you offered simply wasn't what people wanted. Perhaps that doesn't mean you were wrong. Perhaps the time simply wasn't ready. In the summer of 1825, the man submitted his final lecture plan. Fall semester, Monday at 10. The essence of philosophy. Again, no students came. For an entire term, he stood alone every Monday morning, speaking to empty desks. Was it discipline? Stubbornness? Self-destruction? When the semester ended, he tore up the lecture plan. Slowly, carefully, almost like a ritual. The pieces scattered across the floor. He threw them away. He returned his office key, packed his belongings, and left Berlin. He never taught again. That night, his last before leaving, he opened his journal and wrote, "The masses do not want truth. They want consolation.
Sweet lies. He paused. I was wrong. He crossed it out. No, they were wrong. He crossed that out as well. No one is wrong. The world is simply the way it is. He closed the notebook. This was not surrender. It was a change of method. Not the classroom, but the book. Not the voice, but the sentence. Not now, but someday. Hegel taught the students of the present. He chose to wait for readers of the future. Was that resignation or strategy? Perhaps it was both. As the carriage carried him away from Berlin, he looked out the window. The university buildings grew smaller. The corridor that held rooms 201 and 203 vanished from sight. He thought, one day, someone will understand. Not now, but someday. How far away that someday was, he did not know.
In the fall of 1833, a 45-year-old man moved into a second-floor apartment overlooking the main river in Frankfurt. As he unpacked his books, manuscripts, and clothes, he opened a small wooden box. Inside was a double-barreled pistol. He lifted it, testing its weight. The metal felt cold against his palm. He pulled the trigger. Click. The sound echoed through the empty room. The man nodded, opened the drawer beside his bed, and carefully placed the pistol inside. Why did he keep a gun by his bed? Frankfurt was a safe city. Crime was rare. The street was quiet, home to wealthy merchants and bankers. His apartment was on the second floor. The door was solid oak. The locks were reinforced. And yet he did not trust it. Not the world, not people, not the night. On the first night, he lay in bed and closed his eyes. Wind blew outside. Tree branches scraped against the window. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. He opened his eyes. His heart began to race. He listened, straining to locate the source of the sound. He opened the drawer. He took the pistol in his hand. The cold metal seemed to freeze his palm. He held his breath and waited. The wind stopped. He returned the pistol to the drawer, closed his eyes again, but sleep did not come. The next night it happened again. This time he heard a creak on the staircase. He bolted upright, fumbling in the darkness, grabbing the pistol and aiming it at the door. The sound continued. Creak, creak. Someone seemed to be climbing the stairs. His finger rested on the trigger. Sweat formed on his forehead. Then the sound stopped. Silence. He waited. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. From downstairs he heard a servant cough. It had been the servant passing by. The man exhaled and lowered the pistol, but his hands continued to shake. He lay back down, staring at the ceiling until dawn. Only after the sun rose did he fall asleep. A shallow sleep, filled with footsteps, even in his dreams. Every night the same ritual repeated. Before lying down, he opened the drawer, checked that the pistol was there, checked that it was loaded, checked that it was within reach. Only then did he close his eyes. But closing his eyes did not mean sleeping. His ears remained awake. Every sound in the house, the wind, the branches, the stairs, the hallway, the walls, was monitored. After a week, when the servant brought breakfast, dark shadows hung beneath the man's eyes. The servant asked carefully, "Sir, did you sleep well last night?"
The man nodded, unconvincingly. After hesitating, the servant asked again, "Forgive me, sir, but why do you sleep with a pistol beside your bed?" The man lifted his coffee cup. The cup trembled slightly. Small ripples formed on the surface. "In case of burglars." The servant tilted his head. "But sir, this house is safe. There hasn't been a burglary in this neighborhood for—" "Still," the man cut him off. The servant said nothing more and quietly left the room, closing the door with care. What made him so afraid? Perhaps it was memory.
In 1821, in Berlin, the man had argued with a middle-aged woman who lived below him. She sang loudly. Her noise interrupted his writing. He asked her repeatedly to stop. She ignored him. One day they met in the stairwell. The argument flared again. In anger, the man pushed her. She fell down the stairs. She was permanently injured. A lawsuit followed. He was ordered to pay compensation, and rumors spread. The philosopher pushed a woman. He's violent. He's dangerous. He left Berlin, but the rumors followed him. Perhaps from that moment on, he feared retaliation, revenge, someone coming for him in the dark. Or perhaps the fear went further back, to 1805, his father's death, a body floating in the Hamburg Canal, an official record calling it an accident. But the son knew. His father had jumped, afraid of the world, afraid of people, unable to endure life itself. Perhaps the son was becoming his father. The same fear, the same distrust, the same despair. The nights were long. He woke often, at sounds, at shadows, at silence, even at the sound of his own breathing. The pistol was always there, cold, heavy, loaded. He never used it, but that did not mean it was unnecessary. It was protection against the world, against the night, against fear, against himself. One winter night, snow fell. The street was silent. The world was covered in white. He stood by the window, watching the snow shimmer under the streetlights. It was beautiful, but he did not see beauty. He imagined danger hidden beneath the stillness. He returned to the drawer and checked the pistol. It was still there. For 27 years he lived in that apartment. For 27 years the pistol lay beside his bed. For 27 years the ritual repeated every night. Not once did he fire it. No burglar came. No avenger appeared. Every footstep in the night was always the servant or the wind. That does not mean the pistol was useless. It was insurance, a safety mechanism, a final line of defense. He wrote in his journal, "Man is a wolf to man. Hobbes was right. The world is a battlefield. Peace is an illusion. Trust is foolishness. I must defend my territory." That territory was small. 2 rooms, a living room, a study, and the drawer beside his bed. But that was what he wanted to protect. The last place the world could not take from him. Have you ever felt that way? Afraid of the night, uneasy when alone, checking the lock again and again, a racing heart for no clear reason. Perhaps the threat is not outside. Perhaps it is inside. Not distrust of the world, but distrust of yourself. One night the man held the pistol for a long time and stared at it.
The cold metal, the weight, the loaded chamber. What could it protect? A thief? An enemy? The world? Or was it only there to quiet his fear? He placed the pistol back in the drawer, closed his eyes, and that night felt unusually long. 27 years later, the man died. The pistol was still in the drawer, still loaded, still unused. When the servant found it, it was rusted, the trigger stiff. An old thing from another time. The servant placed it back in the box and put it away. No one needed it anymore.
In the 1840s, every afternoon at exactly 4 o'clock, a man appeared on the streets of Frankfurt with a brown poodle at his side. Together, they walked the same route for precisely 2 hours, along the main river, across the Alte Blücher, through the streets of Sachsenhausen, and back home. Rain or snow, wind or cold. The poodle's name was Atman, a Sanskrit word meaning soul. Each time the man said the name, his voice changed slightly. It softened. People passed by and greeted him. "Good afternoon, Dr. Schopenhauer." The man only nodded. He did not stop. His face remained unreadable, his eyes fixed ahead. People smiled as they walked on. Still so distant. Such a cold man. He heard them. He did not answer. He kept walking. Atman walked quietly beside him. When the man sat on a park bench, Atman sat too. The man took a biscuit from his pocket and gave it to the dog. Atman accepted it, tail wagging. The man stroked the dog's head. The brown fur slid softly between his fingers. Atman closed his eyes halfway and leaned into the touch. "Good boy," the man whispered. "You don't lie." Why did he trust a dog? People were complicated. They smiled while speaking badly behind your back. They spoke of love and then betrayed you. They called themselves friends and then disappeared. They claimed honesty while practicing deception. Dogs were different. When hungry, they barked. When happy, they wagged their tails. When sad, they whimpered. When in pain, they groaned. They hid nothing. They wore no masks. They calculated nothing. To the world, the man was a philosopher, a failure who had left Berlin University, a lecturer who could not fill a classroom, a cold son who'd cut ties with his mother, a violent man who'd pushed a woman. That was how they saw him. He knew it. He pretended not to care. But to Atman, he was simply a man, the one who fed him, the one who walked him, the one who stroked his head. That was enough. In the evening, they returned home. Atman went to his water bowl. The man went to his study and sat at his desk to write. The dog lay at his feet and slept. Sometimes, the man looked down and listened to the steady breathing. He watched the dog's side rise and fall. He smiled. A smile no one ever saw. At night, when the man lay down to sleep, Atman lay on the floor beside the bed. The man reached down, touched the dog's head, and said, "Sleep well, Atman." The dog wagged his tail once. The man closed his eyes. And something unusual happened. He did not open the drawer. He did not check the pistol. Atman was there. If danger came, the dog would wake. If something moved, the dog would hear it. If fear entered the room, the dog would feel it. Atman was more reliable than a gun. Time passed. Atman grew old. His steps slowed. The walks became shorter. Climbing stairs became difficult. The man carried him up the stairs, noticed the brown fur turning grey, saw the light fading from his eyes. Just a little longer, he whispered. Just a little. Atman looked at him. The man looked back. No words were needed. One autumn day in 1850, the man was writing in his study when he heard a soft whimper. He put down his pen and went to the dog. Atman lay on the floor, breathing heavily, eyes half closed. The man knelt and gathered him into his arms. He felt the warmth slowly leaving the body. He heard the breathing grow weaker. Atman, he said. The dog wagged his tail once, and then he stopped breathing. The man remained there for a long time, holding the dog, not moving, not speaking. Outside, the sun was setting. The room grew dark. Cold air slipped through the window. Finally, the man stood. He wrapped Atman in a blanket and walked to the river. Beneath a large oak tree, beside the path they had walked every day, he dug a grave. His hands were covered in dirt. His fingernails turned black. He did not stop. When the hole was deep enough, he laid Atman down gently, wrapped him once more, and covered him with earth. There was no headstone. The man stood there for a long time. He did not speak. He did not cry. He simply stood. When he returned home, Atman's bowls were still there. The water bowl, the food bowl. He did not move them. Days passed. A week passed. A month passed. They remained where they were. The servant asked quietly, "Sir, shall I remove them?" The man looked out the window. "No, leave them." "But," I said, "leave them." That night, the man could not sleep. The space beside the bed was empty. There was no soft breathing, no whimpering sound. He reached down and touched only air. That night, he opened the drawer again. He checked the pistol, checked that it was loaded, checked that it was within reach. Atman was gone. 2 months later, the man adopted another poodle, brown, similar in appearance, 2 years old. But the name was different. Boots, a word meaning world. Why change the name? From soul to world, from eternal to temporary, from something sacred to something ordinary. Perhaps he had understood that even a dog is not eternal, that nothing deserves the name soul, that to love is to lose, that every bond exists within the world and will eventually end, leaving pain behind. Better not to expect eternity. Better to call it the world. The man walked again, every afternoon at 4, the same path, along the river, across the bridge. Each time he passed the oak tree, he did not stop. But he turned his head once, looked to the ground beneath it, and then looked forward again. Atman was there. Boots followed silently beside him. Do you have such a presence in your life? Something that understands without words, that stays without judgment, that remains unchanged no matter who you are or are not. Perhaps it is not a person. It might be an animal, a place, a habit, a silence. Something that allows you to endure, something without which you might collapse. The man lived another 20 years. Boots stayed with him through all of them, until the day the man died. Every afternoon at 4, the same walk, the same path, the same pace. Rain or snow, wind or cold. People watched and said, "He only loves dogs." Perhaps he cannot love people. He heard them. He did not answer. He kept walking. Boots followed. Perhaps they were wrong. Perhaps it was not that he could not love, but that he loved differently. Not that he could not trust people, but that he chose not to be betrayed. Not loneliness, but safety. The dog did not leave, did not betray, did not lie. Not until the very end.
In the fall of 1851, a new book appeared in the display window of a bookstore in central Frankfurt. On the cover were the words Parerga and Paralipomena, and beneath them the author's name, Arthur Schopenhauer. He was 63. While out on his afternoon walk, the man passed the bookstore by chance and stopped. Through the glass, he saw his own book. He stood there for a long time. Boots whimpered softly at his side, but the man did not move. In the first week, 10 copies were sold. Each day the man passed the bookstore again. Each time he noticed that one more book was missing from the display. He walked on as if nothing had changed. In the second week, 30 copies sold. The bookseller stacked new copies in the window. The man saw it. In the third week, 50 copies sold. The shelf emptied again, and through the glass, the man saw the bookseller on the telephone calling the publisher. The man did not stop walking, but a small twitch appeared at the corner of his mouth. When he returned home, letters were piled on his desk. "Sir," the servant said, 15 arrived today alone." The man removed his coat and looked at the stack of envelopes. They leaned precariously at the edge of the desk. Stamps and seals caught the afternoon light. He picked one up, broke the seal, and unfolded the paper. "Dear Dr. Schopenhauer, I have read your book with great admiration. It has changed my life. Your philosophy—" He set the letter down. He opened another. "Your ideas were far ahead of their time. Only now is the world beginning to understand you." Another. "You are a true sage. Your teachings—" He spread the letters across the desk and ran his fingers over the paper, feeling its rough texture beneath his fingertips. Then he opened a drawer. At the very bottom lay an old letter. The paper had yellowed, the ink had faded. A letter from a publisher, dated 1822. "Your work, The World as Will and Representation, has sold 100 copies in 3 years. We will dispose of the remaining stock." He had kept that letter for nearly 30 years. Sometimes he took it out, read it, then put it back. 30 years earlier, he had been 31. A lecturer at Berlin University, an arrogant young man who scheduled his lectures at the same hour as Hegel's. The classroom was empty. The book did not sell. The world looked away.
Now he was 63. He no longer stood at a lectern. He lived alone in a second-floor apartment in Frankfurt. And letters arrived every day. A few days later, a letter came from Heidelberg University. "Dear Professor, we would be honored if you would deliver a lecture at our institution." He read it, folded it, and placed it in the drawer. A week later, a letter from Berlin University. "We would be delighted if you would speak directly to our students." He folded it without reading. Another letter, this time from a newspaper, requesting an interview. He picked up his pen and wrote a single line. "I must respectfully decline." The servant asked, "Sir, why do you refuse? Everyone wants you now." The man looked out the window. The Main River flowed quietly below. A boat passed slowly by. "It's no longer necessary." "But, sir," the servant said carefully, "is this not what you once wanted?" The man did not answer. The servant hesitated, then asked again, "Then why—" "They should have wanted it 30 years ago,"
the man said coldly. What did he feel? Joy. Finally. The world recognizes me. I was right. Or emptiness. Only now. Too late. It no longer matters. Perhaps both. Joy mixed with hollowness. Satisfaction alongside resentment. Victory and bitterness arriving together. The man looked into the mirror. A lined face. Graying hair. A slightly bent back. 63. He thought of his younger self, 31 years old, finishing The World as Will and Representation, standing in an empty lecture hall, parting from his mother, leaving Berlin. He wanted to speak to that young man. Wait, he would say. In 30 years, you will be recognized. Your book will sell. Letters will pour in. Universities will invite you. But would that young man have waited? 30 years. That night, the man opened his journal and wrote, Today, I saw someone buy my book. A young man. He flipped through the pages, nodded, and walked to the counter. I felt joy, and at the same time, sadness. He set down the pen and looked out the window. Why only now? Why not then? Why was no one there when I needed them, and now, when I no longer do, everyone comes? He picked up the pen again. No, these are meaningless questions. Time passes. The world changes. People must be ready in order to understand. I have not changed. That is enough. He closed the journal, extinguished the candle, and sat in the dark. Boots whimpered softly at his feet. The man reached down and stroked the dog's head. It was the only comfort he needed. The next day, he walked again. He passed the bookstore with Boots beside him. He glanced at the display. The books were still stacked there. People picked them up. Some carried them to the counter. The man did not stop. People greeted him. Doctor, I read your book. It's wonderful. He nodded, did not smile, and kept walking. People whispered as he passed. Still so distant. Fame hasn't changed him. So cold. He heard them. He did not answer. He kept walking. Boots followed. He had not changed. Only the world had. Only the world had finally begun to understand him, 30 years too late. 9 more years passed. The letters continued. The books continued to sell. People continued to seek him out. He declined. He walked. He wrote. At the same hour each day, along the same path, at the same pace. The world discovered him, but he did not step into the world. People invited him. He did not accept. He became famous and remained alone. Perhaps that was exactly what he wanted.
On Thursday, September 20th, 1860, the man woke at 7 o'clock, as he always did. He washed himself with cold water. Health comes from discipline, that was his belief, and the cold water ran down his aging skin. He did not shiver. He dried himself, got dressed, and stepped into the living room without looking in the mirror. He was 72. He brewed coffee, sliced bread, and sat at the table. Boots sat beside him. The man tore off a piece of bread and gave it to the dog, who took it with a wag of his tail. He drank his coffee. The bitterness lingered on his tongue. Outside the window, the main river flowed, as it had yesterday, as it had last year, as it had 30 years ago. The man watched it. At 10 in the morning, he went into his study. He sat at the desk, opened his manuscript, picked up his pen, and began to write. Boots lay at his feet, breathing evenly. From time to time, the man lowered his head to look at the dog, then returned to the page. The will is blind. Life is suffering. And yet... The pen stopped. The man looked out the window. A bird passed through the clear sky. At noon, he took out his flute. He raised it to his lips and played, but the notes wavered. It was no longer as it once had been. His fingers were stiff, his breath short. He played a few notes, then stopped. He sighed, placed the flute down carefully, and sat still for a long time. Something was coming to an end. At 1 p.m, he prepared to go out. He put on his coat, took his cane, and went outside with Boots. They headed toward the Englischer Hof Hotel. The route was familiar. His feet moved without thought. He sat at his usual table in the corner of the restaurant. The waiter approached. "Meat," the man said. "What kind of meat, sir?" "Any." The waiter nodded, as if he had heard this many times before. While the man sat alone, laughter rose from other tables. People talked. Forks and knives clinked against plates. The man looked out the window. People passed by. Carriages rolled along the street. The world was moving. The food arrived. He ate slowly. A strong mind requires strong fuel, until the plate was empty. He paid the bill, placed a gold coin on the table as a tip, always the same amount, and stood. "Thank you, doctor," the waiter said. The man nodded and left. Boots waited by the door, tail wagging. The man stroked the dog's head, and they walked on. At 4 p.m, it was time for the walk. They went down to the main river and crossed the Alta Bluca. Sunlight shimmered on the water. A boat passed beneath them. Its horn sounded, the echo drifting across the river. The man stopped on the bridge, rested his hand on the railing, and watched the water flow. He stood there for a long time. That evening, when he returned home, he felt more tired than usual. Climbing the stairs was difficult. He was short of breath. He entered the living room, removed his coat, set his cane aside, and walked to the sofa. He sat down. Boots lay beside him. The man stroked the dog and whispered, "We should go to bed early tonight." He closed his eyes. The next morning, Friday, September 21st, the servant came and called out, "Sir, it's morning." There was no answer. He knocked. Still no reply. Carefully, he opened the door. The man was reclining on the sofa. His eyes were closed. His face was calm. "Sir?" the servant said, gently shaking his shoulder. No movement. He took the man's wrist. There was no pulse. The skin was cold. Dr. Wilhelm Grinner arrived, friend and physician. After examining him, he shook his head. "He passed during the night," he said. "There was no pain. Heart failure. His age." "So suddenly," the servant whispered. "He was 72, Grinner replied. "He went peacefully." Grinner looked around the room, a cup of coffee still warm on the table, an open book on the desk, Plato's Phaedo, a dialogue on death. He gave a quiet, lonely smile. "Philosophizing to the very end," he murmured. Boots sat beside the sofa, looking at his master, whimpering softly. Grinner stroked the dog's head. "What will we do with you now?" he whispered. The dog kept staring at the man. A few days later, more people than expected attended the funeral. Young philosophers, readers of his work, people from the publishing world. They stood before the coffin in silence. Someone said, "We have lost a great philosopher." Another said, "His ideas will live forever." People nodded, sighed, and slowly drifted away. The gravestone in the Frankfurt cemetery was simple. Arthur Schopenhauer, 1788 to 1860. Nothing more. No epitaph, no ornament, no long inscription. The man would not have wanted exaggerated praise, false mourning, or ornate words. A name and dates were enough.
That night, Gwynner opened the will. Most of the estate was donated to charities. Small sums were left to the servants. Boots was entrusted to a neighbor. There was one final sentence. I leave this world, but the world will remain within me. Gwynner folded the paper, extinguished the candle, and looked out the window. Frankfurt was quiet. 10 years passed. The man's books became bestsellers across Europe. Universities taught his philosophy. Young thinkers quoted his name. 20 years passed. Nietzsche called him a teacher. Wagner drew inspiration from him. Tolstoy read him. 50 years passed. Freud borrowed from his ideas of the unconscious. Einstein admired him. 100 years passed. He became one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century. And now, in 2024, you are hearing this story. The story of a man who closed his eyes quietly on a sofa. The story of a man who once stood before empty lecture halls. The story of a man ignored by his time, who spoke the truth until the end. Was his life happy? Perhaps not. He was lonely, unloved, unrecognized. He parted from his mother. He was driven from the lectern. He spent 30 years in obscurity. But there was one thing. He lived as he believed, without compromise, without bending, without surrendering, to the very end. Have you ever stood before such a choice? Walking alone while everyone else takes another path? Believing you are right while no one listens? Being rejected now, trusting that one day you may be understood? Schopenhauer said, "Life is suffering, but that does not mean it is not worth living." To accept suffering, to abandon illusion, that to him was freedom. The 72-year-old man lying on the sofa, was he free? Was he happy? Was he satisfied? We cannot know. But one thing is certain. He remained himself until the end. Not the man the world wanted him to be, but the man he believed himself to be. Not by others' expectations, but by his own truth. And perhaps that is all that matters. Not success or failure, but whether one lived as one's self. Not recognition, but whether one refused to compromise. Schopenhauer chose truth, solitude, and freedom. The cost was great, but he endured. What would you choose? A life loved within sweet lies, or a life rejected within bitter truth? Schopenhauer chose the latter. He lived 72 years, and he left quietly. Whether he was right or wrong, that may be a question only you can answer.
If this video brought you peace or insight, please support the channel by liking and subscribing. I will return with another meaningful story soon. Thank you for listening.